Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joe Valero, CERA board member, and I'll be covering a few housekeeping items before I hand you over to your CERA president. So it's my privilege to hand it over to our CERA president, Dr. Sherry Reed.
Thank you, Joe. Hello, CERA. Welcome to our first webinar of 2024 on the first excruciatingly hot day of 2024. I hope you all are hunkered down in some nice air conditioning and ready for some professional learning this afternoon. I have the privilege of leading this really dynamic team of your CERA board this year. And as we're busy planning for our conference in the fall, it's really nice to come together today for some professional learning. A quick note about our conference: it's scheduled for November 6th through the 8th in Burlingame this year. If you don't know where Burlingame is, you should, but it's just south of the San Francisco airport. So we will be in the Bay Area for our time together in November. So turning to the webinar, a couple of years, I just want to make a couple of acknowledgements. A couple of years ago, our board, under the leadership of Corey Greenlaw, not sure if he's in the room, but if he is, thank you, Corey, for the vision, decided that it would be really nice to offer some webinars in between our annual conferences for some professional development and learning opportunities. And so I want to thank today Joe Valero and Nikki Antonovich for organizing our webinar there. And I will now turn it over to a dynamic team from the Sacramento County Office of Education, Rachel Perry, a past president of CERA, and Val Salazar, who is also a current board member at large, and Kathy White. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. It's nice to see our CERA involvement continue to show up in all kinds of different ways. Hello, everybody. I am Rachel Perry. I work at the Sacramento County Office of Education and have been dabbling in data for, I don't know, 20-ish years. With me today is Kathy White, who's also on the team at SCOE, and as Sherry said, Valerie Salazar at the Placer County Office of Education. Kath, can we go to the next slide? The three of us, not only do we have our roles at our respective county offices of education, but we are also part of a data huddle within our 14 county geographic lead region called CFAC, the Capital, oh, I've got to get it wrong, the Capital Central Foothill Area Consortium. Lots of words there. We are going to share a tool with you later today called the Data Use Self-Assessment, and that tool is a product of the data huddle work that we've been involved in for the last few years. So before we dig into content, we want to learn a little bit about who is with us today. Kathy, next slide, please. On this slide, you're going to see some different entities that we have here in the state of California, and you'll also see a number associated with each entity. I'm interested in you putting the number in the chat for the entity that best describes where you work. I'll give you a few moments to do that. Got lots of COE folks in the room, many district folks as well. And maybe I saw Jeremy Decker for research organization. Jeremy, way to represent those research orgs. All right. So this is very helpful to us because, as you heard in our introductions, the three of us work at a county office of education, and we've had great opportunities to work with school districts on data issues that might come up, usually through the differentiated assistance process. Yet we can imagine that working in a school district, you're working with different school sites, and you're trying to create the atmosphere of data use at your district level. You're going to find the tools just as helpful as our COE partners may. So I want to get your brain in the data world, okay? It's after lunch. Why did we schedule this, ladies, for after lunch? But we did. And so we're going to get you get your mind in the data space with our opening question. Next slide, Kathy. In the chat, I want you to tell us, oh, click one more time. Excellent. what is one thing you love about data? And as you're thinking about that, I'm going to share with you a fun fact that I learned while I was preparing for this webinar. There is a Love Data Week. Has anyone heard of that? I had never heard of that before. It's in February. In fact, maybe CERA can do some promotional materials during that Love Data Week. So anyhow, when data geeks unite, they do it in Love Data Week, which is in February. All right, let's see. Ooh, Hillary, data storytelling. Val, thanks for sharing that thought, that the numbers represent stories of students, families, staff members. Lots of you commented about the data telling a story. Some of you love the patterns and the trends and the visualization of it. Okay, perfect. I think I've got your mind in the right space. Now, next slide, Kathy. We believe that your time with us today will be more valuable if you are able to think of a school or a district that you're working with, or if you're in a district, a problem that you're seeing in your current system regarding data. I'm going to give you about 30, 45 seconds to really think about this one example that you'll keep in your mind today. Okay. So hopefully you've been able to identify a school or a district or a problem in your system. Today, we're going to share with you a framework that we believe is going to help organize your data improvement work. And then we're going to spend most of our time digging into the issue of data quality. During our webinar today, you're going to learn about a tool called the Data Use Self-Assessment that we think can aid in helping you pinpoint strengths and weaknesses in your system. And you're also going to learn about key concepts that we think are key to improving data quality. And then before you leave us, you'll get a chance to jot down some of your thoughts and create some next steps in an action plan that will be really practical for you to walk away from here and work with other colleagues. But first, a framework. So because improving data quality and data use is a passion project of Val, Kathy, and I's, we do a lot of reading on the subject. And as we were doing some reading on the subject, we came across this framework that we thought was both simple and practical and really easy to get your head around. You can see it includes 3 layers, and I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. Now, in education, we know that sometimes funding and certainly public opinion is focused around increasing student achievement. And we'd argue that is the goal of all of our efforts. And in order to increase student achievement, educators and leaders set policies and practices, they create programs, and they pay attention to how students are placed, right? All of these actions rely on data in order for them to be accurate and true. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've been in a number of rooms across my career where perhaps you're talking about budget cuts and you're wondering which programs should persist and which ones should be cut. And somebody inevitably says, well, what does the data say? And if you were in the rooms that I was in, everyone's kind of looking around like, I don't know. What does the data say? Do we even collect that data? And then the conversation starts. Well, we have some of the data, but I don't know that really we're collecting it very well. Or there's a lot of blanks in the data. And then you're thinking to yourself, oopsie, well, we don't have what we need in order to make some of these decisions. And given kind of the budget woes that are going to be facing our school districts in the next couple of years, I think data becomes even more important. But now I'd like to draw your attention to the bottom layer. And you see 3 conditions for data use. And these conditions, we believe, are sequential in that data quality needs to come first, hence the topic of our webinar today. We know that once we have quality data, we can work on the other two conditions of data use, which are capacity and culture. In short, I think data capacity focuses on the people in your system and their knowledge, access, and ability to kind of use, analyze, and visualize the data that has been collected. And then the third piece is around data culture. And for me, data culture can be represented in lots of different ways. But one of the most visible ways are in some of the practices in which data might be used, right? Like our data conversations, part of a district's cabinet meetings. Do PLC teams and teachers use data protocols so that we're all looking at data in similar ways? And is there accountability and monitoring built in for the use of data? So again, there are many different approaches and frameworks to tackling data quality issues. This is just one that we found valuable and we wanted to share with you today. Next slide. Now, you guys signed up for this webinar, so I'm guessing you know the importance of data quality. However, we wanted to point out before we dove further into the content of today's webinar that there are lots and lots of benefits for you focusing on improving data quality. Take the example of the budget conversation where we were asking a question of whether we should continue a program or stop the program. Well, because we didn't have the data available to us, we spent a lot of time and money and probably lost productivity trying to chase the data, right? When you focus on data quality first, you're able to save time and money. You're able to allow your team members to stop chasing data, but to actually access what is being used, or excuse me, what is being collected. And then of course, we've got improved consistency. People trust the data. That means they're going to use it more for decisions that are important for our kids. So with that, I'm going to pass the torch over to Kathy, and we're going to start diving deeper into data quality.
Hey guys, are you ready? This is what I feel like when I hear somebody say that data is wrong, because I kind of think like Anthony thinks. I love the data because the data doesn't lie, but you have to make sure it's not lying. And when people say the data is wrong, it's because they think that the data is lying. So data quality is just so important for that reason. Okay, so this is why we're all here. We may have said this ourselves, but we have certainly heard others say it. So let's dig into data quality. Data quality is kind of a vague term, so I just want to get us all grounded in the same definition and talk about all the things it means when we are talking about quality data. So the no-brainer is that data quality is accurate. It's not incorrect, it actually reflects the truth. But data quality data is also complete. And what I mean by that, let's take an example. You have a full student roster. Do you have emergency contacts that are up to date for all of those students? That's an important aspect, completeness. Consistency is also important. Are people inputting data that means the same thing from person to person or from site to site? And attendance codes or behavior codes are a good example of that. Is everybody using the same criteria when they're choosing a code? Timely data is quality data. You can't use, say, you can't make decisions on instruction if you are only updating gradebook data every grading term. That data source is not going to be helpful to you. So having timely data is an aspect of data quality. Now, data being available in useful ways can actually mean a couple of different things. So one aspect of that, for example, say you have a local assessment system and you have loaded all your students into that system, and now you have this beautiful repository of local assessment scores. but is that linked to demographics in your student information system? Are you able to dive in and see by grade level or by English learner status or any of those kinds of things, how your students are actually doing? The quality will be improved the more that you can manipulate that data in useful ways. Another thing that might mean is, have you ever used a system that allows you to export data? And I should put air quotes around that. And you click the button and then you get this like horribly ugly PDF that you can't do anything with. Quality data is data that you can use however you want. So a better way to get that data would be maybe a clearly labeled spreadsheet. So those are all aspects that I will be talking about when I'm talking about data quality. Okay, so like data quality can have many wrinkles in the term. The data is wrong can mean a lot of different things. So when you hear that and you need to look into that perception, you're going to have to do a little bit of detective work to find out why people think the data is wrong. So for example, the data in your source system might actually be wrong. But that's not always the case, right? Sometimes people say the data is wrong, but it's actually not wrong. Maybe there's an import or an export problem that's making it go downstream in an incorrect way. And one example of that might be like, how is the data going from your student information system into CalPad? Maybe there's something wrong with that communication. Here's my favorite. The data is not wrong, but the data does not mean what you think it means. If I can quote The Princess Bride, which I try to do every day. For example, somebody might be polling a suspension rate, and they are saying this is our out of school suspension rate. But if the student information system is counting in school and out of school as a suspension, then the data does not mean what the person polling it thinks it means. So you have to make sure that everybody's on the same page with their definition. So here's one last example. The data is right if you're sitting in the seat of the person who entered the data. But once you start comparing data from different sites, maybe multiple schools in a district, wow, what a hot mess. Then you start to see some problems with consistency, where maybe your data is right at school A, but then when it travels up to the district level, all the inconsistencies and different definitions kind of become clear. And that's what people are saying the data is wrong for. Denominators really matter. Oh, they matter so much. Pages and pages of the dashboard technical guide stand behind that statement, Sherry. So here's what I thought we could do. You guys have probably had some feelings about what I've been talking about and memories of when the data was wrong and you actually found out that something more interesting might be happening. Is anybody feeling super social and brave? They can come off mute and maybe share an anecdote. I know I'm asking a lot. Val promised she would come off mute and help me if this happens. Oops. Okay.
I can start, Kathy, and then maybe
Okay.
this will generate some memories from someone else. We were supporting a district who qualified for differentiated assistance for graduation rate for, I think, English learners and Hispanic students, and they were convinced the data was wrong, that their graduation rate was higher. And at the end of the day, the data was actually wrong. And it was because the registrars at the 4 different high schools in the district were using different CalPads exit codes when students left. And so one school was coding some students as dropouts when really they were just becoming 5th-year graduates. And so that was an example where the data was actually wrong.
Thanks, Val. Is anybody else who would like to come off mute? Please do.
I'm happy to share. So I sit at a research institute, and we put out a report on A to G completion rates. And we got a inquiry from a reporter, who I won't name, but you probably all know, about why our rate was different than the dashboard rate. It was also different than the what is the California ed.gov webpage that has data too, which is also different than the dashboard. And there's these 3 different A to G rates for the same cohort of students. And so late one night, 11, 12 o'clock, I was preparing a response to the reporter and looking at, and this is one of those cases where denominators matter, because the dashboard does not include dashboard alternative schools or students in those schools. And we had limited the sample even further to traditional public schools, excluding charter schools and county offices of ed. And so the rates were slightly different. And the reason they were different was not because any of them were wrong, but because the group of students who we were reporting rates for differed.
I can so relate to that story, Sherry, and it's probably the main reason why all of my visuals and reports have a million footnotes for that very reason. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on, because all this is pretty overwhelming. This is what data problems sometimes looks like in your brain, right? A big knot, a big mess, overwhelming, makes you want to just walk away. They can be very complicated. They're rarely going to have just one fix that's going to make all the data super pristine. So where do you start? There are a lot of ways that you could start to pull apart this knot. And I just want to save you from some anxiety and overwhelm by saying you don't have to fix everything. It's only important that you start. So you can pick one small manageable piece and make improvements and get the ball rolling. Okay. So if you did a simple Google search on data quality to try to get started and maybe wrap your head around your problem and get started, you would find a lot of resources. There are tons and tons of sites and blogs and people with big brains that think about this stuff, creating tools like this tool to kind of help you wrap your head around data quality problems and start to move the needle. So this is one that I was pretty impressed with. It's one nice graphic that visualizes very well where an organization might fall on data quality sophistication. That's a little bit of a look down your nose at other people kind of word, but it's okay. So along that x-axis, you see a range of maturity in not just the people, but also like their data processes and the types of systems and technologies that they have to deal with data. And then your y-axis is the level of trust that people have in data and what the data can do for the organization. So if you wanted to just look at this in a very simple terms, you might reflect on where your department or your school or your LEA falls on this data quality sophistication curve. You'll notice if you look at it closely,
one of the things that we're doing as a foundation.
we might, thank you. This language used in this curve is very private industry centric. It's very corporate. So it's not a great fit for education. That leads me to the data use self-assessment tool. And this is a toolkit that we've been working on this for, gosh, it has to be 3 years now, guys. Is that right? And so here's the short story. In the CC Fact data huddle, we were looking at ways to measure readiness, data readiness and literacy and data culture in districts. and schools, and we're like, this has got to already exist. So we're just going to go take some classes or do some searching, and we're going to find it, and then we'll use it. But that's not what happened, because we didn't find it. So we ended up creating it. And it started with the actual DUSA rubric, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. But we built a whole toolkit around it. And we're not going to go through this entire toolkit here, because we're really just talking about data quality here. But there's a link in the chat to the full toolkit. There are so many resources in there now. We've got instructions for how to use it. We've got the actual tool that you can use in a variety of formats. There's a supporting action plan document so that you can actually take steps to improve, and Val's going to talk about that later. And one of the very exciting developments is a Google Sheets version that Imperial County Office of Education took the DUSA and ran with it. It's pretty amazing. That's one thing you should definitely look at. It's linked into this website. So the good thing about the DUSA is that it's made for education, and it was made by the Data Huddle, so a region of COE people working together, thinking about the needs of you all. So it's made for you, basically. So let's talk a little bit about how it's organized. So I just want to remind you guys, the data use self-assessment is bigger than data quality, because we're measuring data literacy and data culture and some pretty big ideas. This session, we're really focusing in on data quality, but the organization of the DUSA is still important. So you see it's organized into 4 main components, and these areas cover not just machine problems, but also people problems that are inherent in data work. So you've got systems, that's the easy one. It's your software, it's your databases, things like that. Knowledge of data and how to use it, how to communicate data is also in that knowledge piece. Your practices for using data and how your organization thinks about data. And also very important is leadership. How are resources and time and materials allocated to use data, and how are data use expectations set? So the data use self-assessment is huge. It's organized. Here, let's take a look at a page here. There's the 4 components, but under each component are different elements, and then under each element are items, and there's 70 odd items in the full DUSA. We're not going to go through all those for data quality. What we did here is curated the full DUSA and scoped it down to just the items that we felt best applied to data quality, and it's about 1/3 of the size. And this is a place where you can start. So we looked at that data quality sophistication curve as a way to kind of place your organization and where they sit. This data quality elements, data use self-assessment, is another way that you can come together with a small team, go through the subset of elements that are really directed at data quality, and find those glows and grows types of areas. So you know where you're doing well, and then you know what areas you might need to hit and try to prioritize from there. So I see that Rachel has put a link to this scoped down data use self-assessment. You'll know you're in the right DUSA because this one is on a grayscale. What I thought we could do is take just a few minutes to open this link and just look through the items. I have a 5-minute timer up there. I'm hoping we don't need the whole 5 minutes, but just so I can get a good gauge of who's done, so you're not just sitting there bored. When you're done and ready to move on, please just type done in the chat for me. Okay, I'm going to mute myself and we'll just have some big time. I think we're just about done, and I'm not sure whether this thing's gonna make a noise, and I can't stand it, so I'm gonna pause it before it does that. Okay, let me advance the slide. Before we actually advance the slide, did anyone run into any questions or issues with just orienting themselves around the DUSA before we go further? So I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Kathy.
I was gonna pass it to you, but you're always welcome to just take it.
I'm ready. Thanks for
Okay.
passing it along. Thank you, Kathy. Well, hi, everybody. Again, I'm Valerie Salazar with the Placer County Office of Ed, and I sit on the CCFAC huddle with these wonderful ladies. And thank you, Kathy, for laying the foundation for the different reasons that data quality problems could exist. So let's reflect back to that district or school that you each thought of at the beginning of this webinar and keep that front of mind as we progress through some suggested steps of the data's wrong. Okay, now what? Let's create a plan. Next slide. We are going to propose a plan to you that has 5 steps. And these 5 steps specifically tackle data quality and the question of the data is wrong. So if you've ever heard someone say that, or maybe you even thought it to yourself before, like sometimes when I'm in the weeds of going through a massive Excel spreadsheet, which I actually really like. So if you're a data nerd, you're amongst friends here, but sometimes I'm in the weeds and I'm like, this just doesn't look right. Something's wrong. We are proposing 5 steps. Each of these 5 steps are aligned to the data quality sophistication curve that we saw up above, as well as the framework that Rachel talked about. The 5 steps are also fit really nicely into improvement science or continuous improvement. The DUSA toolkit that you may have explored just a minute ago has a handful of tools that support each of these 5 steps. Next slide. So first things first, we do think that this data quality plan fits really nicely into an improvement science process or continuous improvement. I know there's a lot of overlap there. And if you've ever been a part of a team or led a team through improvement science, you know that we always start with understanding the problem and the system that produces it. So if we think back to that ball of twine that Kathy showed, it's like, okay, here's our problem, but where is the problem? Where do we start? In improvement science, you might do an activity to identify the problem, like 5 whys, and eventually create a driver diagram and maybe do some matrix plotting. The 5 steps of our data quality plan could fit really nicely in different parts of improvement science. So let's start with identifying the problem and the system that produces it. Next slide. Step 1 of our data quality plan includes understanding the problem. Okay, so here we are. We're sitting with a group. They say the data's wrong. Our graduation rate is higher. There's no way that many kids are chronically absent. Our Title I rate, our Title I numbers look off. Like we're not quite getting enough money for Title I. What's going on here? The data is wrong. Okay, what are you going to do? We recommend that you complete some kind of data quality assessment. There are a handful of them out there. You know, we explored them in our data huddle, and there's good pieces of any of them. You could really use any assessment here. For the purposes of today's webinar, we are going to walk through using the DUSA or the shorter condensed data quality DUSA. So you lead your team through that process, and hopefully that will result in some really rich conversation that answers some of the questions to the right. Let me pause here and say, if you are interested in going headfirst with the DUSA and would like some recommendations on how to use it, that website that we put in the chat earlier does have links to some recordings of trainings that we did, a train the facilitator training, and then an overview session. So that could be a good starting point if you want some help on how to use the DUSA. Okay, so as we're identifying the problem and the system that produces it, we complete the DUSA and we're trying to figure out which string in that knot do we pull first. Do we push, do we pull, do we feed it through? Where do we start? And so let me see, the data quality DUSA has some elements that will consider all the aspects of data quality and will hopefully lead your team to uncover if the problem is a machine problem, a people problem, or that data sophistication curve also included a process problem. In my experience, we've uncovered each of those. Sometimes the process was unclear, like our data definitions were unclear. Maybe a person needed some additional training, or maybe there was a problem with the actual system. So first step, understand the problem. On the next slide, we're just referencing some of the tools in the data use self-assessment toolkit that could help you and your team document the problems that you uncover. There is a, what is this? This is the action plan in our toolkit. There's also a facilitator's note-taking guide that might help you. And here's where you can just like capture the problems that came up as you guys walked through the data quality DUSA. You may find more than one problem. That's okay. Our recommendation is that you capture them on the action plan, and then later you can go back and figure out where a small change might make a big difference. Also in the action plan, there's an area for you to capture the evidence of why the problem exists. So I recently read an opinion article online that suggested the most powerful word in the English language is because. And so it referenced a study called the copy machine study. It's a little bit dated. And this is what they did. They went to a public library, and the researcher waited in line to use the Xerox machine. It's a dated study. They were waiting in line to use the Xerox machine, and they asked the person in front of them, can I cut in front of you? Versus, hey, can I cut in front of you because I'm in a hurry? When people said, because I'm in a hurry, the person more frequently let them cut in front of them to use the Xerox machine. It didn't even matter if the person said why they were in a hurry. They just said, because I'm in a hurry. And so we find too with data quality that putting the evidence, this is a problem because, will really help with what someone put in the chat earlier, which revolved around buy-in as, let me see if I can find that, ownership and buy-in from departments and school sites. So if you can start putting becauses in your data quality arguments, we think it'll go a long way. And the action plan template has an area there for evidence. Okay, let's go to the next side. So you're starting to understand the problem. Like I said, there could be more than one problem. You just pick one. You start somewhere. In improvement science, one of my biggest lessons learned over the years is to start small. Just start somewhere and start tackling a problem. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're looking at the dashboard with a school or district, and you're saying the data is wrong, but you don't really know if the data is wrong, if your understanding is wrong, if it's a systems problem, a people problem, whatever. As you go through the DUSA, you start to capture some possible problems, and you start putting your becauses in the evidence column. It's been our experience that rich conversation that generates from using the data use self-assessment will really uncover the why the data is wrong, and you can start to choose a problem to start with, right? Where will a small change make a big difference? So if someone says that the data is wrong on the dashboard, is it because we need to refer back to the technical guide and make sure we have an understanding of the denominator? Or is it a different problem altogether? Likely there will be some next steps where you need to look at the raw data and dig a little deeper and maybe come back together and kind of fine tune what the problem is. Okay, so you started to understand the problem. There's probably more than one. Step 2 is pick a problem. Just pick one. And pick one that you can reasonably achieve in a short amount of time with the acknowledgement that you're not going to solve all the problems at once. Okay, so we understood the problem. We're choosing a problem. Step 3. So we talked a little bit about why the problem exists, but it's also super important to talk about why the problem matters. And full disclosure here, this is a step that I think I often skip, but it's so important. So if you are familiar with the here's what, so what, now what data exploration model, this would fit nicely in the so what column. A large percentage of our kids are not obtaining what it takes to be approaching prepared and the college and career indicator on the dashboard. Well, that kind of stinks. Well, why does it matter? It matters because these kids might not be ready when they go to college, or maybe they're lacking some skills to succeed in their first year of whatever comes after high school. And so again, just putting another layer of because behind, well, this is the soapbox I stand on pretty firmly, that will go a long way as you ask people to do some things to make the problem better. So let me give you guys a second to chime in here. What are some reasons in your experience that the problem matters? What are the implications or consequences of having incorrect or unreliable data? Go ahead and come off mute or put that in the chat. What are examples of why data accuracy matters? There's a picture here of students and teachers that might, I don't know, inspire some feedback. Vivian, oh yeah, high stakes decisions are made with data. We need to be accurate. Oh, another comment about decisions from Jake. Yeah, these decisions could be how we spend our money. These decisions could be at a micro level, like whether or not a student gets the level of support that he needs. Catherine, stakeholders need to be able to trust the data to make decisions. This is not something I predicted. Those first 3 comments all center on decisions, on what happens after the data. Yep. I worked with some friends at a charter school that had 100% A through G completion, but they did not know how to code that in their student information system. So they reported 0. Oh, that matters, Chris. That totally matters. At the end of the day, having reliable and accurate data that sits really high on that data sophistication curve of data quality matters because it impacts students. And it impacts teachers and it impacts families. And so just an encouragement and a reminder that in step 3, you keep that front of mind. Yeah, Joe accurately tells the story of the system. Sherry, bringing in a lens from policy. Yep, state level policy decisions and investments are based on data available and shared with legislators and their staff. That's even more macro level of why data accuracy matters. Okay, so we started to understand the problem by completing the data use self-assessment, documented it on the action plan. Then we pick a problem. Be sure to take some time to define why the problem matters. I'm gonna pass the baton to Kathy to lead us through step 4.
Voice for unmuting myself. Woo. So without good data, it's like being lost in the wilderness. Like you don't even know what direction to step in, right? So we know that that's a good like foundational reason for doing the hard work that is involved in a data quality improvement plan. But I'm not trying to be like Parks and Rec Leslie Knope on you. There's no need to like get your binder and your dividers and create like this 10-pound document for data quality improvement, because we're giving ourselves permission to start small and to really just come to terms with reality. So you, at this point in the process, you have a good idea of some things you might try and why a problem exists. But you have to get real with how many staff do you have to fix this problem, and how many million other things do they have on their plate. Technical expertise and systems and resources, those can be real barriers. So you have to get realistic there also. And as I alluded to, LEAs have so many competing priorities, and some of them are kind of like putting out fires day to day. So when you're making your plan, it's best to keep those things front of mind and make your plans realistic so that they're achievable. Otherwise, data quality is not going to really improve. All right. My mouse key does not want to work. So here we are back at the notes that you wrote down during your process. You may have an issue where you know what your problem is, but you're not really sure how exactly to get started solving it. Luckily, you have nerd Kathy White, previous life database manager, web developer, programmer. I have written a few pages in the data quality improvement plan kind of master guide that might get you started in unraveling some of the nitty-gritty situations that you might come across. So I just wanted to make sure that you have that resource if you do get stuck. There are some no-brainer things that you can add to your data quality plan, or some no-brainer things that you can implement to start improving your data. First things first, data validation, that has to get done. It's like you have to do the dishes, you have to do your laundry, you have to validate your data. So creating procedures and putting them, you know, pen on paper or Google Sheet or whatever, however we document our processes these days, you should document those and base them around the kinds of problems that you've observed. And let me give you an example, because you may be wondering what I mean by that. Like, say that you are really diving into your attendance data and you know that there's a problem there. If you create procedures for how attendance should be reported, and I'm talking, you might, if you're finding you have a teacher problem, it should be focused at that data entry point. Maybe you're finding it in your attendance office. You can, if you find it there, you're going to make it revolve around those folks and the work they do, but you're going to document that and write it down, not just for your staff, but also to kind of remind yourself of what you guys were all thinking when a year has passed or 6 months have passed or things like that. You are going to want to create a calendar, and data validation doesn't work so well if you're just doing it one time a year. That puts it right up there with taxes. You want to be doing this regularly so that you're catching problems early and that your data is more usable throughout the year. And I keep hearing this come up in the chat about buy-in. There's a couple of points of buy-in that are important here. If you're constantly circling back around to data validation multiple times of the year, you're also communicating its importance. And you're also communicating, hey, you can trust this data. We're checking it so it does not lie. And if people start to then use the data more, that then again turns around to the data entry people, and they're like, ooh, this data is being used. It is important that I put this in there correctly and using the procedures. So it's this nice little feedback loop that you can get started. Data quality needs to have a person responsible for it. Now, I don't mean that you necessarily have to make like a data czar, a title I would love to have, by the way, Rachel Perry. That'd be awesome on a business card. You don't need to have like one person who's responsible for all the data in the entire LEA, because that would kind of be bananas. That would be a lot of data, right? And a lot of very specific data to different parts of the system. But you got to assign responsibility. Maybe attendance data is on one certain person. Let's go back and do another old psychological study called the bystander effect. So if everybody is responsible for data quality, then nobody's responsible for data quality, because we're all assuming that somebody else is doing it. So you really need to assign a point person, maybe a point team, where the buck stops there, and they're the person who is signing off that data validation has been done. Okay, more no-brainer stuff that you can add. Data definitions are so important, and we were talking about those numerators and the fact that different measures exist in different places with different wrinkles. And Dashboard and Data Quest is a super easy target, right? Because they use the same name for a metric, but they're not the same. The numbers are different, and people notice when the numbers they look up deviate from the numbers that you report. So that's just one example, but there's data in your own system that needs to be clearly defined for everybody, not just the data enterers, but anybody who might actually pull the data and use it. They should know very clearly what they're using it for is correct. So we talked a little bit about procedures and documentation, calibration activities. And this is, when I say this, what I mean is pretend like you had a council of attendance clerks from across the district come together, Game of Thrones style, and just hash things out around the table and kind of talk about how they're doing things and coming to some kind of consensus. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about calibration. Data reports and training on data reports. I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here. I cannot count the number of times people have said, I need X report, but it doesn't exist, or I don't know how to pull it, or I don't have access to it. Those are all things that you can train people on, make sure everybody's up to speed so that they can use data and reinforce that positive feedback loop where then the data enterers are like, everybody's looking at this data. I can't get it wrong. And with that, I think I'm turning this back over to Val.
You are. Thank you, Kathy. So to piggyback on that, step 5 in our plan is to assign the responsibility. So not just, Kathy laid the groundwork really nicely to talk about the importance of having people assigned to it, but this step says, let's put it on paper. The DUSA action plan template has a column that says, this is our action, by when, who's responsible. If you happen to work with any PBIS teams or intervention teams, that portion of the action plan template mimics PBIS meeting notes really nicely. So that'll be really comfortable for folks who live in that world. But let's assign some responsibility. I think it was Einstein who said, if everything is important, then nothing is. Similarly, if everyone is in charge, then no one is. That's a groupthink, philosophy that I learned in my organizational psychology class back in undergrad. If you have multiple people doing the same work, no one's going to do it. So let's put some names behind it. Let me give you some examples here. In our organization, we have one person who's responsible at the end of the day for CalPads, one person who's responsible for ARIES, different pieces of student information system data entry. But then there are more local organic metrics and measures that are kind of homegrown. We have a data warehouse where we track all of our LCAP metrics, and every single metric for every plan we have, ATSI, lots of acronyms, you guys, I'm sorry. ATSI, CSI, what other acronym can I throw out there? Some of our grants all live in this one spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet has the metrics, some of them are local, and then it has a name next to it. That person has to have the skills, the access to the systems, and the authority to actually track and capture those data pieces. So it's super important that you have, multiple layers of leadership on board with this when you start to assign your data stewards. Make sure that those folks whose names are next to the data points actually have the authority and have the green light to start tracking those data pieces. And sometimes that means you might need a process map or a checklist. Think about the problem that you defined way up above, right? Who's going to be responsible for pulling the green string in your ball of twine? And then communication around that is super important too, making sure everyone in the organization has an understanding of what that looks like. There's a photo here of a guy working at home, because sometimes that means your program data analyst or your data entry person is in somewhat of a silo, working either at home or in the office. And so just keep that in mind and make sure that that person has what they need to be the data steward. So transitioning really nicely into what data stewardship is. Next slide. Data stewardship is the practice of ensuring the organization's data is accessible, trustworthy, usable, and secure. In other words, you have high data quality. It does assume a life cycle from beginning to end. Who's responsible for editing, preparing, using, storing, and archiving? So again, the action plan template has a place for you to start plugging in your data stewards as you assign responsibility to the actions that will make a difference. Kathy also has a really nice document that she created that lives in that folder. I don't remember the name of the folder, but there's a data steward one-page document. Oh, next slide, Kathy, I'm sorry. That I love. It is so simple, so to the point, and you can edit it to make it work for your problem, whatever problem you guys determine, to plug some names into that. Make sure also that your data stewards are responsible for the data definitions. Again, sometimes those data definitions are defined by the dashboard technical guide or by the data quest definitions, but sometimes they're local measures. And sometimes that requires that you write a definition somewhere, whether it's in your data warehouse, or I saw in the chat that someone has a data guide to explain all the reports. Oh my gosh, I love that. All the reports, maybe not only how to pull the reports, but how to read them. Right? So make sure your data stewards they're responsible for maintaining those definitions, documenting the procedures that it takes to make sure the data has high quality. You may also need to train your data stewards. Those are the folks doing the data entry and then also the end users. We do need some processes and make sure that the data is certified. CalPADS has a formal certification window. And so we've recently adopted the process that our data quality team, we're so cool. I feel like, oh yeah, we're geeks. We have a data quality team. We get together and review our CalPADS reports before we submit. So by the time they hit the dashboard and they hit data quest, we have a high level of confidence that those are accurate. By the way, that process is how we identified that our Title I numbers weren't quite right. Because we took the time, we set aside time to look at those CalPADS reports together, and we knew who was responsible. We uncovered that we were missing out on some Title I dollars because this is what it was. Our process, we had a document that our program data analysts were using to assign Title I in our student information system. The definition was slightly off, and we didn't know that. And so we were missing some students. And so we have fixed that through this process. And so now we have a data steward responsible for that as well. Okay, that was a lot of me rambling. I want to give you guys a couple of minutes to look at that data steward document. If you could click on the link in the chat, take a peek at it, and think about how it could apply to that problem, school, district that you identified at the beginning of the webinar. Thanks for sharing. Jake says he likes the data steward document, simple, streamlined document to organize a team and provide focus for each member. Yeah, thanks, Jake. At this point, I will hand it over to Rachel to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thanks, Val. I want to share one data steward experience that came to mind as Val and Kathy were talking. Years ago, I was asked to investigate data practices in a district, and all those pieces that were on the last slide that Val mentioned need to be in place. Because what happened in this district is they had data stewards identified and assigned. And I did a lot of interviews with the district team, and I asked questions like this. Okay, so what do you do when you get the data file? Okay, well, how do you get the data file? Well, it turned out that it was a CalPADS extract file that most of these folks who are identified as data stewards were more content experts. Let's think about English language learners, for example. So you might have your Title III person getting EL data, but they're getting, could have been a text file, and they don't know how to pull it into Excel. And when push comes to shove and their CalPADS person is like, well, does it look good? Does it look good? What do you think the person does? They simply say, yep, looks good to me. And so it's a both and, right? The person needs to be identified they need to receive the data in a format that is meaningful to them, and they need that training, right? So let's be sure that we are tackling many dimensions of that data stewardship and not the simple assignment of the who, without making sure that they're successful in their role. But now it's time for you guys to ask us some questions, or maybe for us to facilitate a conversation among you all as participants. We are comfortable with you putting a question in the chat, or we're also comfortable with you raising your hand, using the Zoom features, or simply coming off mute and we'll call on you. Anthony, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you for taking my question. I don't know quite how to put it into words, so that's kind of why I'm going to ask it in probably not a very coherent manner. So I apologize for that ahead of time. But it seems to me like this suite of documents and this process can be adaptable to meet potential DA technical assistance because of CalPads. And I'm kind of thinking, has there been any thought given to basically making this or adapting this language to make it a protocol should county offices need to provide support to districts who will be in DA or technical assistance, whatever that is, because of CalPads, because it just translates super well outside of just a couple words. I don't know if that all made sense.
Anthony, do you
Thank
see
you.
the smile on Val's face? Do you see that smile? She's beaming ear to ear. You are so right. When that legislation came out, whenever that was, a year or so ago, Kathy, Val, and I were like, oh, woohoo, there might be new life for the data use self-assessment. There certainly isn't a need to reinvent the wheel, in our opinion. And you started out your question with using the word flexible. This tool is that, right? When you're, not only could it be used in its entirety if we had a district that didn't certify their CalPads and needed to undergo kind of this data audit, but also you can imagine using this tool for one piece of data, like attendance or behavior incidents, as Val and Kathy talked about earlier. Or perhaps you think data quality is dialed in and now you're ready to move on to capacity and culture, right? Just as Kathy, I'm going to say Kath, sifted through the full tool to select items that to her fit with data quality, you could do the same if you had a district that might be struggling with implementing certain practices that kind of reinforce a strong data culture. Val and Kath, please add on. Anthony, thank you for the question. You gave us a chance to toot our own horn a little bit more.
I was smiling so big because it was almost like we planted you, Anthony, with that question. Just to piggyback, so the mini or shortened version that we presented today of the DQ-DUSA was proposed as a way to tackle data quality. But if you look at the larger version with all 4 components that are color-coded, you'll see that there are elements there that some fit more nicely with CalPads or any data system than others. And it's intended to be versatile, where maybe you and your team want to tackle just 5 items, 5 questions. You want to rate just 5 questions as a team, or maybe you want to do the whole tool. So it's intended to be incredibly flexible. Use the documents in the way that works best for you and the problem that you're trying to tackle.
Awesome. Thanks, Val. I see that Chris added a reference to the chat. Chris, it sounded like my description of the CalPads extracts resonated with you.
Yeah, it's very few people don't know what those are, and I've noticed that when you bring on new staff, CalPads is overwhelming because it's very complex, as we all know, and it's one of just a dozen reporting components. And so I've been endeavoring to try to break down, very complex Excel documents and official documentation into very easy to use explanations. And, even then it's a challenge because people, it's just too complex, so
Yeah.
you have to slow down and go through these pieces and help your colleagues to understand, the timelines, the data governance structures and, all that stuff. So, it's been a little endeavor of mine to try to make it easier for my colleagues and also to master it myself, quite frankly. You don't know something. Somebody mentioned Einstein. You don't know something, unless you can teach it to others, right? So this was kind of my effort to try to understand all of the compliance pieces for data stewardship. Yeah. So
Thank you, Chris, for sharing, and
No.
you're absolutely right. And I think people also, while always well-meaning of like, "Ooh, I'm in this role. Okay, well, now that I've got the data, what do I check it for?" Right? To give them tips and tricks for checking for reasonability. Well, what does that mean? Right? Comparing numbers to last year to see if it generally makes sense. Thank you for sharing that resource, and we love it when data geeks unite and share their passion projects. What other questions are coming up for y'all today?
Well, Rachel, this is Chris again. If I can just add one more thing, the data steward document that was assembled is fantastic, where it shows the dashboard indicator and then the data and then the place for the data steward. I think that could be built out and be very contextual for SIS systems to give folks like my friends at the charter school, this is what you have to do in Infinite Campus to show your graduation rate or your college and career rate, or this is what you have to do in Aries or Power School to show that, because that's the next step. The vendors really don't go there to show the schools what you have to do necessarily. So they're scrambling. And I just think that could be a wonderful extension. Maybe in the future, CERA could have a Power School or an Aries group that just takes these documents and kind of builds them out. I think that would be extremely valuable.
Look, Val's giving you a heart there. Sherry and Joe heard that too. Thanks for the suggestion. I think you're right. This document forms a foundation that we can take it in so many different directions. As you were talking, Chris, it reminded me back of when Val was talking about the why, right? I mean, so often you're just like, okay, Chris, well, you're going to be the data steward for attendance. And you're like, okay, cool. Well, often folks don't stop to tell you why that's important, right? It could
Or-
be done in so many different ways.
Right, or how to do it. So
Right.
if you're a brand new employee lumped into Aries and now you have to print out A through G requirements and 100% of your kids met them, but is it going into CalPads correctly? How do you verify that? So a round trip on data entry, data validation, data reporting, sign off, that's essential.
Yeah. I love that phrase, a round trip.
Yeah.
Totally. You're totally right. Okay, well, I think the last thing we wanted to share with you today is another learning opportunity. Our friends at the San Diego County Office of Education have partnered with CCEE, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and they are launching this fall a new data literacy and leadership academy. And I just learned about this, gosh, Kath, was it last week? Maybe last week. So I think it's new. I'm going to pop their website URL in the chat. They have kind of an interest form so that if something like this is of interest to you, when they are ready to launch registration, they will pop you an email and let you know that opportunities are there. Some of you may know our colleagues down in San Diego County Office of Education. They last year created a brand new data impact center, and they are intentionally focusing on helping their districts improve data quality, data culture. So it was thrilling to me to see this partnership. I believe they're going to have 2 tracks, one for folks who are brand new to K-12 and K-12 data, which can be very overwhelming. And then the second is for other leaders who are interested in furthering their experience and maybe their coaching of data quality, capacity, and culture. With that, I think I'm going to hand it back over to Sherry. Thank you all for your engagement today, for your interest and your really important questions and comments. We really appreciate it. Sherry, thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Kathy and Val, for sharing this important information. I've had a lot of, as a researcher, I've had lots of conversations the years with district and county folks on data, and never really been able to point them to tools. So I appreciate this, that I can share as well. Thanks so much. So that brings us to the end of our first webinar this year. We hope that you will stay tuned. We'll have another one in the fall. I don't, Joe, do you have information on that yet?
More information to come.
Okay, great. Great. Okay, so stay tuned in our newsletters for more information on a fall webinar. And don't forget to register for the conference. Registration and the room block are open on our website. And we'll see you in Burlingame in November. Thanks, everyone.